Casey Hendrickson.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in. News Talk 95.3, Michiana's news channel. I'm your host, Casey Hendrickson. And producer Tim screening your phone calls, taking any traffic updates that you have. And joining us on the phone line right now is GOP senatorial candidate running against Senator Joe Donnelly, Mike Braun. Mike, how you doing today, man?
Very good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. So I guess, why don't we just start off with the new campaign ad from your opponent that came out? A lot of the listeners on the station yesterday had some things to say about that. He opens up the commercial by saying that some people want to hand your health care over to the government, and then he says, over my dead body. But a lot of people are hearkening back to his vote for Obamacare and his votes against repealing Obamacare. And isn't Obamacare socialized medicine?
Well, I think the whole idea back then was, based upon, trying to cover pre-existing conditions and no cap on coverage, but it was a faulty plan from the get-go in that it never had any way to bring costs down. And, he was very surprised, as were his, liberal cohorts when they found out a resourceful entrepreneur from Southern Indiana actually found a way to do it. So I think, the Democrats gave us big health insurance along with big government. And I always say, where has that ever gotten less costly or more effective or even held its own? It was flawed from the beginning. And in my own company, I got tired of insurance companies saying, hey, you're lucky it's only going up 5 to 10% each year. And we had a big meeting, lasted about 3 hours 10 years ago, and I found out how much they were making on our plan. And, there were no elements of transparency. Where do you spend that much money and never ask what it costs? And I wanted a plan that was going to be reliable and that wasn't going to go up each year, and found the formula. And we've been running with it for 9 or 10 years. And as hard as it is to believe, we've held premiums flat. And when tax reform went through, we actually lowered it by $1,400 a year.
Now, obviously, this is one of the big campaign issues. Obamacare has hurt a lot of families. I don't have insurance as a result of it. We went to the direct patient care model here this year. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but family of four, $150 a month. We can go to the doctor as much as we want with nothing additional coming out of pocket unless we get medication. It's been great for us. So what is your solution if Obamacare is going to be repealed? One, would you support that repeal? And two, what is your solution to replace it to help keep those costs down like you're talking about?
Well, what you were talking about there was really the industry is starting to get some stirrings of doing something other than business as usual. And really, insurance was never intended, I think, to do the minor health care costs. And that's disruption in the industry where doctors and patients are dealing with one another without the heavy overlay of government. Another good example would be LASIK surgery. When I looked at that 10 years ago, it was about $2,500 an eye. And now you can get it done for $250. And that's because it's one of the few things that has no insurance involved. It's just doctors and people wanting to get the procedure done, working within the free market. And we've just not had any of that. And what I'm trying to do is every time that you engage the healthcare system, you've got to have a little skin in the game to lower costs. And, I've got a system that protects you from any significant illness or bad accident. And it was kind of a bold move, but it was mostly common sense. The government wants to do it by paying for everything, and that's not going to work.
So how can people learn more details about specifically what it is you want to do?
Go ahead. Ask that again. I didn't hear you.
So what specifically is your plan going to do? Maybe people are listening to it and going, all right, sounds great, but what exactly is happening?
It's gonna take the individual that engages in healthcare to where you're going to actually shop around for what you do, and I'm going to have, since I'm keeping the cost down, to where, for instance, my plan costs $900 a year for an individual, and the average individual due to the fact that they are now engaging the system, just like any consumer only has $1,500 a year into their deductible. That same plan, Casey, if you look at Obamacare, costs roughly $4,000 just for the premium. So what my plan's going to do is make it transparent, is where you're going to engage just like you would in anything else, just like the doctors are doing with you on your monthly health care plan, getting rid of the heavy blanket of corporate overhead that you get with health insurance companies the way it's currently delivered. It's a disruptive way of doing it. It's consumer driven. It's got health savings accounts and a lot of tools like telemedicine. It's just doing things that are common sense that have taken the cost out of healthcare. And until we do that, we're going to drift towards a one-payer system. And I don't want that to happen.
Now, obviously, a lot of Hoosiers were a little upset that the attempts to repeal Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act altogether kept falling one vote short. And a lot of Hoosiers believe that that vote could be the Donnelly seat in the Senate if it were to flip to you. And Mike Braun, if you were senator from Indiana, would you support repeal efforts of the Affordable Care Act?
I definitely would, and Donnelly was the deciding vote basically against it. It failed by one vote, but conservatives have got to be prepared to come back with a plan that's going to work. Over the last 3 to 6 years, people in general are fed up with healthcare costs going up year after year. And I won't be for any plan that doesn't cover pre-existing conditions and no cap on coverage. And that's what Obamacare was about, but it never paid any attention to how do you do that affordably. Remember, they called it the Affordable Care Act. Well, from the day one, it kept getting more expensive, and now you basically got one choice in many states, and they never focused on lowering costs. I've been doing that for nearly 10 years, and I think I could walk into the Senate and have more ideas about how you have good insurance that's affordable than anything that's come, onto the floor out there.
All right. And again, we're talking with Mike Braun, GOP senatorial candidate against Senator Joe Donnelly in the state of Indiana. Mike Braun, you guys have had dueling ads about outsourcing and overseas jobs and things of that nature. Both of your ads are playing on this station right now. Do you own any manufacturing facilities in China or other countries? Have you sent any jobs overseas? And how many Americans do you and your company employ?
Okay, zero in terms of having any presence in China. 100% of my employees are here in good old USA. We're a distributor, so we don't really make anything. And the good news is, when I started, it was 100% American made. And we still, through the companies that we buy from, 75% of the product is made here in America. So we're lucky. And in Joe Donnelly's only time he's been involved in a business, they shipped the jobs to Mexico. And then I hear just recently that they were importing stuff from China as a manufacturer. So we've never done any of that. I'm proud that I built the company in my hometown, and it's been a great place to work. And Chuck Schumer and the liberals that have been running his campaign of negative ads, will do or say anything to hold on to it. But yeah, Joe's little involvement in business. Jobs went to Mexico, and he was importing stuff from China. We've never done that.
And Mike Braun, obviously one of the things that is a consistent debate in this country, firearms, safety, school shootings, any kind of a mass public shooting, and that always leads to a big debate about what new restrictions we should have on the Second Amendment. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment, any proposed restrictions, and if you are in favor of any, what would those be?
Well, I'm first of all endorsed by the NRA, and I think every time any type of death by gun is tragic, and especially in mass shootings, and the liberal side always wants to start taking away and impinging upon rights of law-abiding citizens. So I do believe, and we did it in our own school system back in Du Bois County, in Indiana in general, has been ahead of the game when it comes to school security. And the other thing is, so often when there is a mass shooting, there's a mental health issue involved. And I think we can't be as timid as we have in the past, and make sure you ferret that out. Normally the other side wants to do a comprehensive infringement of Second Amendment rights, and that's not any good, and I'd never be for that.
Now, are you, by any chance, I live in the state of Michigan. I'm right across the border. I do my show in Indiana. Michigan looks to possibly be legalizing recreational marijuana. There's some discussion about maybe that changing at the federal level. Where do you stand on that whole issue?
On the whole marijuana issue, I think that is an issue that should be left to the states. I know, the marijuana use for medical purposes is being talked about, in our own state currently. Jim Lucas has led on that. And I think, when it comes to that issue and many of the social issues, I'm kind of a guy that believes states ought to be more involved in that and the federal government out of it. So I think that'll progress as states see fit. And here in Indiana, I'm sure that, we'll make the right decision. When it comes to recreational use, I think that's a lot different than, medicinal use. And I think that, again, it should be left up to the states.
All right, one final question for you. What is your stance on the trade and tariff situation with the United States and these other countries? And obviously, we're pulling out of the International Postal Union, which we just discovered actually exists. So what is your stance on all of that stuff?
It's a complicated issue, and I think the main gist of it's all going to be is what happens with China. I think President Trump, when he took on some of these trade deals that had built-in inequity to it, that it was smart, and I think that seen the fruit there and the fact that Mexico and Canada have come to the table, and we've redone that. I think with the EU, that'll happen too. I believe with China, they're a tough customer. It's an autocratic country politically that's learned capitalism pretty well, and the things they do are much more ruthless than just tariffs. When you look at intellectual property theft, you look at just the stuff they do, and I think that's a whole different issue.
All right. I wish we had more time with you. Maybe we can get you on again before the election and talk about immigration and some of those other issues that are obviously pressing right now for Hoosiers. But, Mike Braun, we appreciate the time this afternoon, and best of luck in the campaign.
Thank you, Casey.
All right. We appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Braun, GOP senatorial candidate running against Senator Joe Donnelly to be your next senator for the Hoosier state of Indiana. We've got more coming up on News Talk 95.3, Michiana's news channel.
KC Hendrickson, News Talk 95.3, Michiana's news channel.
Your breaking news and weather station.